Okay, hello. So my name is Max Grunig. If you haven't met me before, welcome to this POCACITO network update. And today's topic is regenerating Sonora, applying regenerative principle and practices. And I'm very excited to have here with us today Christopher Casillas. He's from Superior, Arizona. And it's actually where we met in 2019 when POCACITO came to Superior with 4 European guests talking about the circular economy, so resource and materials efficiency, and talking about principles related to the resource side, but also to community building. And this worked really well, this event, together with Chris, and it was really a lot of fun. And I'm extremely excited that he made time to talk to us here today. He's a co-founder and head of Regenerating Sonora. And if you haven't heard of the nonprofit yet, it's a nonprofit focused on regenerative community development. And if you want to see more about what they do, they have a website and a Facebook page, etc. And I think we're going to post them in the chat later on. That's also just for your information, so you can post questions in the chat. That's fine. You can also raise a hand if you want to actually ask them verbally later, and then we can also talk to you in person, whichever way you prefer. Also, of course, depending how loud your environment is, or if you have a microphone, etc., etc. That being said, welcome, Chris. So good to have you here. Long time no see. I'm very excited that things are moving forward and to see so much happening in Sonora. It's really amazing. Thank you for presenting today.
Absolutely, Max. Thank you for having me, and thank you all for joining today. I'm excited to be here, and I'm going to switch over to presentation mode, and let's see if we could do this without a hitch here. Max, you want to let me know if you're seeing a picture of some handsome man with the microphone?
Yes, I do see it. I do see it.
Wonderful. This is a quick shot from when like Max mentioned, he came over with some guests to present to us there in Superior, Arizona. And so it's only fitting that now I'd be presenting to you guys. So that was a fun and exciting time. And I'm so happy that we've continued the relationship, Max, since that time that you came to visit us. In terms of our agenda for today, we'll do some abouts about myself, about our nonprofit Regenerating Sonora. And then we'll get into a little bit about what regenerative development is through the lens of how we're doing our work within Superior. We'll talk about how we're applying it. And then we'll take a look at how these concepts can be applied to yourself, your relationships, and your work. And then we'll have some time for questions too. So definitely put your questions in the chat. I won't be looking at the chat as I'm going through this, but it'll be a way that we can collect some questions that we can then get into at the end of this presentation here. So I'm definitely looking forward to that piece of it. So a little bit about me. I'm a 5th generation community member of Superior, Arizona. Prior to my work in community development, I've spent time in the tech industry, about 12 years in various leadership positions. At some point, I realized that I'm on this planet for something more meaningful than making a software company a better software company. So from that insight, one thing led to another, and I left the corporate world to focus on addressing societal dysfunction at a root cause level. And so my journey for identifying the roots of our societal dysfunction and the best response to it led me to becoming a student and practitioner of regenerative development. And from there, that's taken on quite a life of its own. So the concept of regenerative development is used differently by different people. And you'll see here that where I'm pulling my information from and where my lineage comes from in this work is through Carol Sanford and the Carol Sanford Institute and the Regenesis Institute. And so I definitely recommend looking into both of these organizations, especially the Regenesis Institute, if these concepts are new, because they do a really good job of taking someone like me who had no idea about what this work was, and through a developmental process, helping me to understand it more deeply. So with that in mind, let's move ahead. I mentioned like looking at societal dysfunction, and I'm so glad for Buckminster Fuller to provide this insight. This idea that you can never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And so that, in a way, has been a nice guide for me, because there's all kinds of ways that you might go about addressing societal dysfunction once you start to realize the systemic issues that are at play. And so one way might be to fight against it. Another way could be to build something new. And that's where Regenerating Sonora comes into play. It's a response to this journey. It's a response to the societal dysfunction and the systemic issues underlying it. And we're doing it in a generative way, in a way that's creative versus something that's trying to fight something else. So our vision is we see all life thriving in the Sonoran bioregion. And some people might ask, like, why bioregion versus the Sonoran Desert? You may or may not be familiar that there's a global movement that's happening right now around bioregional regeneration. And we're working towards playing a more meaningful role in this movement that's taking place right now. So, Regenerating Sonora, we're doing regenerative community development, like Max mentioned. And so there could be some questions around, like, what does that actually mean? So I want to be explicit about some of the premises that we're using as we're approaching our work. A good starting place is with place. The fact that place is where life happens. Like right now, I'm talking to you from Superior, and so much of my reality is shaped by the place that I live in. It's the container by which so much of our social dynamics take place. So much of our life is predicated on the place that I live in, the place that you live in. Now, each one of these places, as you can imagine, is nested within larger systems. So like in this image here, you can see we have Superior, and that's nested in the county system that we have, which isn't really a living system, but it does have a significant influence in what happens in our place as a whole. The Copper Corridor, this is more of a ecological system that is relevant to us here in our town, in our place. And then we have the state of Arizona, and then we have the Sonora bioregion. So you can see how the town of Superior, or the place of Superior, is nested in these larger systems, and there's a dynamism that's taking place. There's exchanges taking place from one to the other, and you can see that our town here is shaped by what happens out there, and we have an influence in the greater whole as well. So another premise is that people have the potential to help or to harm. So when we look at societal dysfunction, especially on a systemic level, we're going to see a few things. One of the things that we're going to see is that it's people who created these systems in the first place. It's people who are participating in the systems that give them their strength and their relevance. And it's people that have the potential to create new ones that can be a blessing instead of something that could potentially be extractive to both the planet and to ourselves. So we have the potential inherent within us to be a help or a harm. To meet the challenges of our times requires our collective wisdom, devotion, and will. Our head, our heart, and our hands. And so, if we see that people can help and that we can be part of the solutions to what's going on, especially since it's us that created a lot of the dysfunction to begin with, then we want to see how we can start to address that by tapping our collective wisdom, our devotion, and our will. That's some of the upsides that we have here, some of the inherent and latent potential within us. So within our work, what we want to do is realize and actualize, and those are two important distinctions there. Well, that's an important distinction between the two: realizing potential and actualizing potential of underserved places through people for the mutual benefit of the whole of life there and the system it's nested in. And so when you hear those words and then you look at this image here, we're looking at Superior as a whole. It's a living entity. It's a living being. It's the town of Superior. That's how we see it. And this place has an essence, and this place is nested in these larger systems. And so we want to support life within the whole of the town or the place of Superior. And we want to do so in a way that is a benefit to all the systems that are greater than it, that are nested or that it's nested within. And we want to work with people within our place here as the ones who can actually unleash that potential. So our way of working on the Sonora bioregion, if you think about this as like a large region within Turtle Island or the United States, we then look down at Superior and we see that this is like a kind of nodal intervention. You can also look at it like Superior is like an acupuncture point that when we touch on it and we have an intervention here, if we do it well, if we do it wisely, we can see that it can actually have these systemic benefits that impact the region as a whole. And that's really at the heart of the work that we're doing. So we see ourselves as instruments of the place, adorning its essence, not imposing our good ideas upon it. Some of the community development work that happens today, many times is people saying like, oh, I've got like a really good idea. Let me impose it upon the place. Well, that's really part of what got us into the mess that we're in to begin with, imposing things upon. Now, other people will say, oh, well, we'll go to the place and then we'll ask those people that live there, what do you think a good idea is? And then we'll put those ideas into the place. That's still not the same thing as what we're talking about here. It's as if we are talking to the place itself and saying, you know, what is it about you that makes you unique? What's the essence of this place, in this case Superior, that we're looking to adorn or amplify? You know, the idea of adorning something is like amplifying the essence of a thing. And so that's really how we're relating to the work that we're doing. That's more of what regenerative development work is amplifying the essence of the living system that you're working with, not imposing the ideas. And hopefully you can see that concept between going to a place and saying, hey, what do you think is a good idea? Let's do that, versus looking at the place itself as a living entity. And we'll get into what that actually looks like in practice in a bit. Lastly, long-term, we'll work with multiple communities within the Sonora bioregion. That's the plan for our nonprofit. We're starting at home first. So of our board members, all of us but one live here and grew up here. And really, we want to see that Superior is the place that we start with tending. And you know, long-term, we have no timelines for when we'll start looking at other communities. But when we do, we'll take a similar approach of understanding the essence of this place that we're working with, and then from that derive how we'll actually work within the place itself. Okay, Chris, that all sounds good in theory, but like, where do you start? How do you actually put this into practice? So let's look at that now. So I mentioned the idea of starting with the whole of Superior and then seeing the essence of the place, and then our work becomes bringing that essence out more deeply. So the Regenesis Institute, like I mentioned before, something that they can help with is this process of doing a story of place. It's as if we can see persistent patterns throughout all the living systems within the place that we're working with. So in this case, we can see how there's similarities and similar patterns showing up between the geological systems, the hydrological systems, to the way that plants and animals organize in the place, to the pre-contact history and the stories of how this place worked before colonization took place. And then we can actually look at post-contact history. And then we can look at all these things and say, where's the golden thread that ends up showing up in all these different places throughout time, throughout different living systems. And this then gives us an idea of the kind of energies that we're working with the place itself. And it gives us an idea of the work that we're going to be doing, because we now have a better sense of what this place is all about. You can see that that's different than just asking a couple people about their opinions. And we are doing that, but we're seeing how it all links together in this contextual whole that is looking from all kinds of different perspectives to get a deeper sense of the place itself. And then that becomes our work, is working with that place. So we did this here in Superior, and it's an ongoing process, by the way, that we do. But there's three main patterns that showed up around the essence of the place of Superior. This idea of appreciating hidden gems, or appreciating what's hidden. And that appreciation concept, there's a kind of a double meaning to it in a way. It's like appreciating on an emotional level, and then like increasing the value of. And both of these things have taken place in all kinds of systems that we see. Same thing with transformational concentration. You may know that this has been a big copper, silver, and sometimes even gold and obsidian mining place. Mining has taken place here in this town 6,000 plus years ago, with the obsidian mining that took place from the First Nations people that lived here. And how it is that all that even came to be is the land itself having a kind of transformational concentration process that it does to even create these ore bodies in the first place. And that is a pattern that we then see extending throughout multiple systems. This idea of great transformational concentration, even like there's a kind of boom and bust cycle that happens within this place that's occurred all throughout time as far as we can tell, but especially when humans started inhabiting the place. And there's also this concept of enabling diverse exchange. This place has been a melting pot. It's an interface between different elevations and also different people groups, the exchange amongst people and each other and people and animals that have taken place. And then the deep social capital that we have here. It's a 3,000 person town. And within this small town, there's all kinds of exchange going on here. And I just wanted to give you an overview of some of these patterns, because I then want to show you how we're applying this into some of the work that we're doing. So this idea, I think I've already mentioned some of these things. We're establishing a baseline of how this place works and what it's all about. It is an ongoing discovery process too. We're always learning more and deepening our understanding of this place. But by doing this work as a starting point, it helps us to see what kind of place it is that we're working with, what kind of work we might be doing, and how we go about doing it. Okay, so that's some of the basics on the story of place and where we start. This is our org chart. We use Sociocracy as our governance system, and just as a short plug, I highly recommend Sociocracy. We had Diana Leaf Christian as our teacher and trainer for Sociocracy, and double thumbs up. It has helped us in so many ways. And what you're seeing here is our circle structure. We have our board, and that's one circle, and then we have these different circles that we've created for various purposes. So we have a fundraising and communication circle. That's pretty straightforward, I think. Superior Can. This is our community aid network that we started in response to COVID. And there's multiple things happening there. Natural Capital Circle. One of the main projects that we're doing right now is a garden project, and we'll see that as well. Leo's Maintenance and Logistics Circle. We have a building, the one that of the picture that you saw Max speaking at, that was in our community center that we started up in 2019, but we haven't done much with it since COVID happened, and we'll take a look at some of the activities that we're doing there. The Prickly Pear Festival, again, this is something that has been going on in our town for a number of years, and Regenerative in Sonora became the nonprofit to start organizing this. And we haven't done much with it, but there's potential for what we'll do in the future, and again, because of COVID. SenseMaker, this is something that we're starting right now around distributed cognition within our town. Theory U advances this idea, which you might be familiar with, which is that to change a system, help it to sense and see itself. And so that's part of what we're doing with SenseMaker. We'll take a look at that in more detail too. Okay, so this is an image of the flyer that we put out and post around town and have on Facebook and everything else. One of the programs that our community aid network is doing is a free feeding program for our youth. And so we can look at something like this and say, well, how does this exactly fit in with this idea of these patterns that we talked about earlier, appreciating hidden gems? Well, in this case, it's like, our youth here in our town are our hidden gems. At least they are some of our main hidden gems that we want to appreciate in multiple ways. Transformational concentration, the fact that we're able to take this problem of COVID and see it as potential for us to serve in greater ways has been a way of really shifting the dynamic between, oh my gosh, we're the victims of this thing, to we're now taking action into our own hands about how we're going to help each other out. And that actually is what birthed our community aid network to begin with. And enabling diverse exchange. So there's a few things going on here. There's not only us handing the food to the young people who come by to receive it, but we also see this as a touch point between us and various members of the community. And so there's ways that we can provide them with helpful information for access to resources that they might not have known about before. And there's a lot of other things that we can do there. And I would also want to say that this community aid network, part of what it is also doing, not just for how we're helping the community who's asking for the help itself, but we're also building our own capabilities of self-organization. We're building our own capabilities for establishing patterns where every third Thursday we're providing food to our youth, and we have a program and an event to do that. And then we're raising up young people who are volunteering for how they can start to lead some of the sessions that we do to improve what we're doing, and also to take some more leadership within the activities themselves. So we're building capabilities along the way. And here's just a couple quick newspaper clippings from some of the work that we've done. Okay, I mentioned the garden project. He's a little camouflaged here, but you can see there's one of our students here and another one here. They're taking some measurements for what's going to be the start of our micro farm project that we're doing. And hopefully you can see how these three patterns of the essence of our place is at work here, like transformational concentration. Well, there's definitely going to be some transformation going on in this concentrated place. You can see that a lot of work needs to be done here. Enabling diverse exchange. So right away we have the diverse exchange between the students and us and our nonprofit, between the students and the place that we're doing this project on. There'll be exchange between the biodiversity that we are intentional about bringing about within the place, that then starts to happen between the animals around the area that start to exchange with this place itself, the neighbors and the people who are going to be passing through. And of course, appreciating hidden gems. This is a nice piece of land right here on one of our main streets that just really could use some appreciation, if you want to put it that way. And so that's some of the work that we're doing too. And of course, the kids themselves, this is something where they're increasing their eco-literacy, and they're getting involved in something in a hands-on way too. This is a couple quick pictures of some of the growing technology that we're going to be putting in the micro farm. This is a Lear garden. You see Ed Williams here, who's the creator of this kind of technology. It's mixing a number of growing technologies into one. Here you can see it installed in a couple different places. This one's here at a school in the Phoenix metro area. So really exciting stuff that we're happy to be bringing to our town, and also to the awareness of our youth as well. And so we see this as increasing eco-literacy. We see it as increasing our capabilities to grow locally sourced food, and also as a way to serve the ecosystem that is our community itself. I mentioned the community center before. And one of the things that we're doing is having it as an incubator space. And so we have a local artist who has started the Boundless Creator Space. And this is a place where one of these local artists will actually teach some of the lessons around how to use different materials, and will provide resources for young people, or people of any ages, frankly, who want to come and express themselves creatively and artistically. And so you can see some images of us doing that. And again, I won't necessarily walk through each one of these for how you can see each dynamic at play, but hopefully you can at least start to, if you can see the pattern, you can start to see how these things that we're talking about are expressions of it. And then the Prickly Pear Festival, like I mentioned before, we're seeing clearly how all these different dynamics are at play. And it also shapes how we actually go about doing our event. Once we understand what it is about the place itself, then we can see not only do we want to do this Prickly Pear Festival to appreciate the hidden gem that is the prickly pear, but how are we going to do it in a way that's transformative, in a way that enables diverse exchange. We are then working with the energies of this place and we're sourcing them as a way to do this work. And then the Prickly Pear Festival itself becomes an instrument for the greater expression of the town itself. And then SenseMaker. This we could probably spend a lot of time getting into because it's deep and it's exciting and it's pretty cutting edge stuff around distributed cognition. One of the ideas here is we're sourcing stories from people within the place to get a sense of what are the emergent possibilities that we have right now. As an organization, there's all kinds of ideas that we want to have once we get a sense of what it is that this place is about. But what actually makes sense right now? What are the adjacent possibles that we can move towards now that won't see a lot of friction, but will actually be supported by the dynamics that are at play in our place right now at this time? And that's just a short little bit about what SenseMaker is all about. Okay, Chris, thanks. That was all good. Maybe it was interesting even, but maybe you still want to know, how do you apply some of these concepts to your own life? You don't want to just sit around and hear what some group is doing out in Superior. Hopefully it's inspiring. Maybe it shifts your thinking in some ways, but let's get specific about how it applies to you. So within regenerative development, we are using living systems frameworks all the time. And the main one that I've highlighted here is this nested systems framework. Everything works in this nested way that exists within our life. You can look at that being the case from like, I'm an individual, in a household, in a community, in a region. You can look at it from like the cells in my body that organize into an organ, that are a collection of, it goes on. I think you understand the concept here. I don't need to belabor the point. So the one that I want to focus on for this session with us today is what they call the 3 lines of work framework. And that is self, relationships, and then your work. So self, that's pretty straightforward. You can see yourself as a whole, and then you can think about what you might want to do to develop yourself. Then you have your relationships, and an easy way to look at this would be like, let's say you work for a nonprofit yourself or within your organization. Well, the team that you work with, that is the second line here. First line is yourself. The second line is your team. Your third line is the work that you guys do together. And you can see there's a lot of different relationships that you might have. Second line groups would be like groups who come together for the purpose of learning new things. Like I would actually say that POCACITO, for example, is a second line group in the sense that this isn't a place where you're actually doing the work itself. At least I don't think it is. It's a place where you're coming together to learn from each other. It's a place where you're a community that have friends in the work that you're doing, and then you're helping to develop each other's capabilities. That'll actually be applied to the work that you all do. And so I'm just trying to relate this to some of your direct experiences, but I'm hoping you're at least seeing this enough to where you can start in your own mind, start thinking about what are my second line groups that I'm a part of? What are the teams that I'm a part of? I mean, even your family is an example of that, right? Your group of friends that you have, this is all within the second line, and maybe you might be endeavoring to do work together or not. But either way, you can see how it applies within this first line, second line, and third line. So I'll just pose a few questions that you can start to think of within each one of these lines. One of the key aspects of regenerative development is focusing on essence. So a question might be like, what's at the essence of myself? What's at the essence of the work that I'm doing? These are questions that when you start asking them, they can get pretty deep, and rightfully so. And this really is at the heart of what it is that we're doing. And by asking this question, you might start to get some shifts in your thinking around how you might relate to either yourself or what you're doing differently when you start to focus more on the essence of it in the first place. This idea of intrinsic motivation is coming from the essence of what it is that you're doing. And the more clear you can get on that, the more powerful what you're doing will become. Now the question is, what are your aims? Now, what's the difference between aims and goals? Well, goals have a clear like start and end to them, whereas aims are ongoing pursuits. So what are the ongoing pursuits that you have as it relates to yourself, as it relates to your second line groups, as it relates to the work that you're doing? by having a clear sense of what your aims are within each one of these levels of yourself, you're going to start to relate to that work in a very different way, or you're going to start to relate to yourself in a very different way. And so it's a really important question to ask that brings about new insights and might start to change your behavior and even just your own state of being as well. Classic regenerative development question, since at the heart of the work, it is developmental. So we can tie that to what capabilities do you need to develop? So let's say you have these aims, these ongoing pursuits that you have. Well, a question might be, what are the capabilities that need to be developed in order to achieve those aims, or to realize those aims? So see that those ongoing pursuits actually take place in a good way. Well, there might be some capabilities that you need to develop to do that. So, for example, I'll give you a real tangible one right now. I'm running this session off my phone because I live in a rural place and my internet went down. So like earlier on before we got into this session. So like a very practical one would be like, I need to develop the capability to have faster, more reliable internet. Okay, I mean, maybe it's not so esoteric, but it's a very concrete and specific thing that I need to get done. Just as an example to try to make this a little bit more tangible for us. Another question within each one of these lines might be, what is your North Star? So for yourself, what's the direction that you look towards that helps to guide the work that you're doing, or to guide how you are in the world? That's the idea of a pole star. Well, then there's a touchstone, which is like the quality of the thing that you're doing. So there's this idea of direction and an idea of quality. That's this idea of like, what is the gold standard for the thing that you're doing? So within the work that you're doing, you might ask, well, what's our gold standard? That's more touching at like the qualitative level at it. When you talk about a touchstone, the idea back in the day was that someone has, let's say they have some gold or something. Well, then you have a touchstone, something that you can touch to feel, to say, okay, does this quality of the touchstone's like your known quantity or your known quality? You can say, okay, I know that this is gold right here. So as I touch this, do they feel the same? And if they feel the same, okay, I know that you're giving me something, hopefully, that isn't a fraud. It gives you a kind of standard to work off of on a qualitative level. So what this question is asking the pole star, what's the direction that you look towards to see to guide what you're doing? And then what's the touchstone that you're using to get a sense of the quality of what it is that is happening? And that exists both on the levels of self, your relationships, and your work too. Okay, and just a few calls to action. If any of this seems interesting to you, one is, we have a ongoing, this is my shameless plug here, we have an ongoing GoFundMe campaign happening right now to fund some of the projects that we're doing. Everything's very bootstrapped. We're working on developing our own capabilities for fundraising, and that would be very helpful. Anything that you might be able to provide, or even just share this campaign that we're doing with some folks in your network, that would help us out a lot. I think Max has a link to that information. Another one is checking out the Regenesis Institute. If you just Google Regenesis Institute, you'll find this page, and you may want to consider taking a course in the Regenerative Practitioner series. This is something that I've done. It's been totally life-changing for me, and it was so helpful to find something that was productive, that actually deals with the root cause issues of our times, instead of something that is like either destructive, or something that's like fighting one thing versus another, back to that Buckminster Fuller quote that I mentioned earlier. And I think that's it. So thank you all very much. I think it's a good time to make this more interactive. I've done my spiel here, and I was very happy to share this with you. So thank you all. Let's see what kind of questions we have.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. And this was really amazing, because you both covered kind of the conceptual level, but also very concrete, very specific, what you're doing locally. I want to come back to this situation that, of course, you started in 2019, and then came COVID, and it changed everything. I assume it changed your plans a lot. You referred to it a few times. Just very qualitatively, how much do you think Superior has been hit by the crisis?
Anytime we have a loss of a community member in our town, we all feel it. It is because we all know each other. There's something that I hear our young people say all the time. They always say, "We're all family here. We've all grown up together here." And so, just on a personal level, feeling the loss of someone in our community, it is quite the sting. I mean, just in middle of January, I lost my grandfather due to COVID. So, this is it really touches home in a very strong and potent way. At the same time, in terms of what it is that we're doing, it's important that we have a kind of reframe that we go from, and it's sometimes easier said than done when it's let's say a family member or someone very close. But there's this general idea of part of regenerative work is seeing potential instead of problems. And so, we looked at what was going on with COVID, and we said, oh my gosh, we had all these plans for a community center. The community center was really going to be the hub of everything that we were going to be doing from there. And we had to shift from that. And so what we did was we said, okay, well, what are the opportunities here? We see the hazard, so hazard COVID-19, and then we can say, well, what are the inherent opportunities within this? In this case, we saw that it was a way that it engaged all of our will to want to do something beneficial for our community. And it was out of that birthed the community aid network that I mentioned before. And so then that's something that's been going on for a year now, well, almost a year. It'll be a year in April. And the last count was somewhere around 10,000 meals that we've provided to young people here in town. So that's an example of how that reframe actually comes to be.
Great, and I'm sorry for your loss and for everybody's losses who had to go through this. Is a very terrible time, and still I think it's really so positive that you say we're taking this as potential, the crisis as potential, and try to see what we can do with it. Want to go back to your foundation or the starting point from your personal experience, and I think that's maybe interesting to other people too, who might think, oh, this is a great concept, a great approach. It's a great strategy. It seems to have worked in Superior, but how was it? How did you get people motivated to come on board? Was it difficult? Did you have to kind of drag them, or how did you get them to also be engaged and fascinated by this?
There's this idea of inherent potential that people know and feel as long as you're actually talking about like the real potential that's there. If you're kind of making something up or you're bringing the potential within your own mind, then that doesn't really motivate people. But when we are sourcing the potential from the place, we actually call it place-sourced potential, then it's something that is self-evident and it's almost inherent in the place. So you're now talking about something that people just know instinctively, sometimes implicitly, sometimes explicitly, depending on either how much time they've spent in the place or how much they've thought about it. But when we're being fueled by the potential of the place itself, that becomes what gets people motivated, because they all know it and they see it, and it's something that's self-evident to people. And so that then becomes the motivating factor, and it starts to galvanize will, because we're pointing out things that everyone sees, whether they are talking about it or not.
Excellent, great. I think just from my side, I'm a transplant in a way. I'm a German. I live in the US, but I also haven't lived in any place for a very long time. And so I'm now in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I've been here less than a year. You're fifth generation. So in how far do you think, do we have to, is this something that we can do even if we're not really from somewhere? Like if we're fresh, in my situation, or somebody else, people in the US move a lot around. And is this an issue for this concept of, really understanding the essence of place. And I really love the concept, but for a lot of people, it's of course a challenge. They have to move either because they want to, be it for college or for work, or some people have to move because of a hurricane or something happens and they have to move. So can we do this when we're not really from where we are right now?
That is a great question. I mean, you might have mentioned, seen earlier that part of our intention is to work with other communities later on. So we'll definitely be applying these principles to our work in community development outside of the place where we're all from. So the short answer is yes. And how is, I think, starting from just a paradigmatic shift, which is you move out of your own head and into the place that you're in, even if you're a visitor there for a month or less or what have you. We are just shifting our point of orientation to the place itself, just asking the question, what's unique about this place that I'm in? What's the essence of this place? You can ask that question, and you'll find that you'll get a lot of interesting insights just by changing what you're doing. Because now you're relating into a different way. You're not saying like, I'm an instrument for my own ideas that I'm going to propagate into the world. You're saying I'm an instrument for this place. So I got to start by understanding how this place is. One question that you can ask, this is more of an embodied experience, but when you're at a place, you might just ask the question, how is this place processing me? Which is an interesting question to ask. You start to see how do you feel differently within your own body when you're in a particular place. You can also sometimes just sense when you cross a kind of invisible boundary point from where you were to where you are. When you drove into Superior, most likely it was right around when you saw the Picket Post Mountain and came close enough to it that it became this switch of like, okay, now I'm in a new place. Well, that's when you can start to pay attention at that transition point. How are you starting to feel? What's that doing with your body? That's one way to do it. And then there's all the more analytical pieces of like understanding the patterns within the multiple living systems that take place. Just asking people questions like, what do you love about this place? Usually you're going to start to find some similarities, and those similarities are going to start to weave together some kind of inherent pattern about how this place works.
Great. And you mentioned there also something that struck me really as special, that you combine the quantitative information and more technical information with just knowledge that's in the community and with histories and stories and personal experiences. And this is so interesting because very often you have these as polar opposites, right? You have the technical people who say, it has to be census data, and if it's not a statistical measurement, we can't work with it. And then you have the other side where you have artists very often, or storytellers who don't have the access to the technical side. And so these can't come together and can't really leverage the change. And I think this is a very interesting approach, because that's usually where I see a lot of challenges, because if you only have one side of this balance, you're missing out on a lot of the information in the story. It's very, very amazing. And I hope that, that we can actually see this being applied in more places. I think a lot of places would benefit from basically discovering of the essence, but then also looking at what can be appreciated or improved on or embellished. You said that too. These are great concepts and terms, the hidden gems that we need to discover. I wanted to ask you for just understanding. You mentioned the Lear garden concept, and you had photos, and of course you explained it to me before. And I know some people here on the call might know this already, but not everybody maybe. So maybe you can just, I don't know, in a very short time frame, just give an idea of what's special about this as a gardening concept. I think you're muted. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's so interesting to see the the latest developments that are taking place. And I'm not as in tune with this world as some other people are, but this guy Ed, he lives in Phoenix, so we're sourcing some potential within our own local area, well, at least our approximate local area. And the idea is combining multiple growing systems and technologies into one, with the end results being very low water usage, low maintenance requirements, and high yield. And this is doing things like mixing hugelkultur into the overall processes and generating really high quality soil. We have worms in there to help with the soil generation itself. It's almost like a soil generator as just one of the functions of what it's doing. You might have seen in some of those images that there's like a circular area off into the middle of the area, and that is where we have a tilapia pond or some kind of a fish pond that's integrated in with the system as well. So they're fertilizing the water that's getting sent into all the plants that we're growing. They filter out some of the waste, and then that gets transferred back into the pond itself. So you have a closed loop system in that way. And we haven't gotten past the part of figuring out an alternative for the fish food. That's so far the main thing that we have to import in for it to continue to work. But outside of that, and then the basic water usage that's required, it's pretty close to a closed loop system. So yeah, really exciting stuff. And it gives an opportunity for us and for the students to learn more about the way that there's a dynamic between the various ecosystem qualities and services that they all provide.
Great, thank you for giving a brief overview of this. And of course, it's interesting because you have both sides. You have basically the foraging, the desert foods that are just there. And then you have, I would say, I mean, it's high tech in a way, or like cutting edge combinations of technologies for gardening. I mean, it's still in the natural ecosystem, so it's not indoor farming in a container or so. So it's still natural in a sense, but it's still very different from foraging in the desert. And you do both, and it's kind of exciting. Hoping, is there going to be a Prickly Pear Festival this year?
That is a big question that we're all asking. We know at the very least that we're going to have a foraging event, since that can all be done outdoors. And like you said, it's a big part of what we do. And depending on what is the safest thing for us to do based on where we're going to be at in the summer months, which is when the prickly pears really like to be harvested, we'll see. So thanks for asking. Yeah, we actually have a meeting with the mayor, the town manager, and a few other people in about a week or so to discuss this in greater length to see what's going to be the most appropriate thing for us to do. So if it doesn't happen at of any significant scale this year, certainly we're very hopeful for next year.
Great. Yeah, we all, and of course, I mean, we all have our fingers crossed that both for everybody's safety and health, but also for, mental aspects, that we can overcome this pretty soon. So you mentioned the mayor there, and so this brings me to the question. Of course, it's great that you have a lot of support, but has the mayor been on board right away, or city council, or all these people? I mean, usually in a community, you have a lot of different minds, basically, and different also interests. You have people who maybe represent a certain business, or also different age groups. And has there been people who had more questions about it, or people who had maybe a harder time coming on board? Let's put it that way.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so far we have been blessed with a lot of support from the mayor, the town manager, city government, or town government. They've all been very supportive of what we're doing, and at least there's multiple reasons for that, right? It's just the part of the fact that as much as we can, we like to work together and be supportive of the endeavors that other people in our town are doing. There's there's a lot of reasons to be supportive of any kind of activities taking place here. Like, we're a opportunity zone here, we're very low income, we're 100% free lunch for the students because we're a Title I school, on and on. There's a lot of things that are challenges for us. So when we have groups of people who want to do something and are motivated to do it and have the support of people who are getting involved, it goes a long way. And the other thing I'll say too is that, some people say that we have a kind of perfect storm right now because we have a very engaged and involved set of town leadership, including the mayor and town manager. When we're working with the potential of the place, with the essence of the place, that becomes a kind of unifier amongst folks, because we can speak towards what we're doing in a way that is relatable to people of all walks of life who live here, whether they're new here or whether they have long histories here, because we're getting at those self-evident pieces that people feel and see.
Excellent. And we're coming towards or close to the end of our session. And I wanted to ask you, because of course, physically, we're all very much separated in different places. And one question would be, how can we, stay in touch both with what you're doing locally, but also how could we maybe bring these ideas to where everybody else is, and including in the setting we have now, where travel isn't possible really. But do you have any thoughts about this or any plans for this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would say that could be a collaborative exploration that we take together, because there's probably all sorts of ways that could manifest itself. And so I would say that it's a great question that maybe we don't have ample time to get into now, but I'm certainly open to having a separate discussion outside of this time frame here to get into exactly that, because certainly there's going to be ways that we could do that. So yeah, I would definitely welcome a conversation around that.
Great. Yeah, and that I really appreciate that, because I think a lot of people have communities that, well, can benefit from such. I would almost say it's almost like a healing exercise for a community. And I mean, I'm in Charlottesville, and you probably all know how broken community has or is here, still is. And we haven't really managed to heal the community. And this might be similar in other places. So definitely there's a lot of need. And it's a lot more because right now we see, of course, the federal government is sending a stimulus, and there's money coming, and money is always great, but isn't everything. And I think you point this out, how so much is about the building the rapport, the relationships, and the understanding the system you're in, the place. So this is, I think, was for me very mind-opening. I honestly, I thought I would basically know everything you had to say, but I learned a lot. So this is very refreshing and inspiring. I hope I can get some people energized about this too, but I really will follow up with you about, how you can basically spread this concept in other places. It's definitely, it's a challenge when you're a little bit, caught up in the day-to-day and the tricky parts of regulatory discussion, or all this, at the local level or at the whatever level. Everything is always racing to catch up about planning or fulfilling obligations. And you don't have that time very often, or you feel like you don't have the time to take a step back and say, where are we, and what are we doing? Like you mentioned this, the aims, the pursuit. I mean, this very often totally lost with what we do when we race all the time. So maybe also a call for like a slowing down of our processes. And so a lot of great ideas. if there are any more questions, I hope you'll be available via email, etc., for people to follow up with you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm more than happy to engage after this discussion here that we've all had. And I am curious to hear if anyone on this call would like to share something that's shifted in your thinking, something that you gained from this talk, or a question that you might have. Because Max, you and I, we talk all the time, but I only get to talk to these other faces that I see some pictures of just this one time. At least this is our first time that we're doing it. So anyone have something that they might want to share if they feel comfortable doing? If you just want to chat it, that's fine too. But it'd be ideal to see your face on video so we can connect that way, but certainly not required.
Yeah, and if this doesn't work right now, because who knows, people might be in a lunch break or in a car or something, we can also do a follow-up meeting and schedule that, or have a hangout. Hi, Erin.
Hi. Yeah, I think I just want to share, this. Thank you so much for this presentation. First of all, it was really great, and it really got me thinking. The scale of the community you work in is fairly small, obviously, and I work for a city that's about 85,000 people. But it really got me thinking of how could these sorts of approaches be used to build that kind of community. Because we're obviously not a town where everyone knows everyone. But maybe on a neighborhood scale, or maybe something on a smaller scale, using those techniques to build those connections could be really interesting. And so kind of thinking about that and how it relates to some of the work our team does, I got a lot to think about. So thank you very much for that.
Nice. Yeah, Aaron, I appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, definitely that's one of the unique things about the work that we're doing is how small we are. It's one of our advantages. In some ways it's a disadvantage, but in a lot of ways it's an advantage. But what you can do, if you think of this 85,000 person place that you're working with as like one big whole, then you can start to ask the question, like, what are the smaller holes that are nested within it? It can be hard sometimes. This was a big shift for me, because I used to think in a more sort of fragmented way, like maybe like a single issue that we're trying to advance or deal with. But instead, if we can start to think about wholes and see like whole communities or whole places that are smaller than this larger whole, that can be a place for that nodal intervention concept or that acupuncture point that affects the larger system that it's nested within.
Yeah, great, thank you. And I love the concept of acupuncture. That's really very, very cool, because it links a lot. I've been reading a lot about tactical urbanism and so on. So it kind of links with this idea that small measures can have a lot of impact. I love that. So we're already over the hour of the meeting. And I know people, despite it's a Friday, people still have things to do. So I want to say thank you so much for joining, and for thank you also for asking questions. And Chris, above all, thank you for presenting and talking to us today. We're going to meet again in about a month with a new network update that will be just after Earth Day. But Chris, let's follow up in between, and let's see how we can keep this topic going and maybe bring it to more communities.
Yes, very nice. Well, it was certainly a pleasure being here with you all. Thank you for the opportunity to come spend some time with you today. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to an ongoing relationship and discussions. So thank you all so much.